Hi, guys.
Hey everyone, it's Amr from Toronto,
And it is Aaron.
and we're recording live Das Criminal, your favorite podcast.
By the time you hear this, it will no longer be live.
Technically we are recording live, but you won't be listening live.
Life happens live, did you know?
Time is a very linear concept, to us at least.
So, what are we talking about today, Amr?
We are talking about the little-known Tulsa Race Riot / Tulsa Massacre. Of course, names themselves have a singular power about them. So here I think I'm going to refer to it as Tulsa Massacre, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, and we should probably note that this episode does include violence, specifically at the hands of white people against Black people. And we just want you to know if that's something that's very upsetting to you, just be aware, use your own discretion before listening to this episode.
Yeah, and also warning that there is going to be references to sexual violence. So if that is uncomfortable or upsetting, that's totally understandable. And you may want to skip this episode.
Yep, we're not trying to upset anyone or ruin anyone's day, but at the same time, this is a real story. This is something that did happen, and it must be discussed.
Yeah, I mean, the true part of a true crime podcast needs to be applied here.
Yep.
So 2 days ago, June 19th, marks a day called Juneteenth that many people commemorate or celebrate, and it refers to June 19th, 1865, when Union Army General Gordon Granger announced in Galveston, Texas, that all slaves there were now free. Although Abraham Lincoln had announced the Emancipation Proclamation almost 2.5 years earlier, Texas constituted the most remote of the states in the post-Civil War United States. Thus, the abolishment of slavery had finally arrived to the then American frontier. Today, of course, Juneteenth is celebrated as a day slaves in the United States were finally emancipated. We are recording this episode today, Sunday, June 21st, and yesterday, President Donald J. Trump was hosting a rally of his supporters in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The choice of Tulsa to be the first site to hold a post-COVID political rally may seem odd at first, but a deeper look into the history of the city reveals disturbing information. Between May 31st and June 1st of 1921, mobs of white residents rampaged through the predominantly Black Greenwood district of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Official data reports 36 deaths, though estimates range as far up as 300. By the end of June 1st, Greenwood was reduced to rubble and ash. Once called the Black Wall Street, the district was nothing but ruins. Our dateline is Tulsa in 1921, but to explain the Tulsa Massacre, we have to rewind a bit. By the end of World War I, in 1918, returning vets caused intense labor competition across the country, including, by the way, Black veterans who served in segregated units during the war. Also, 3 years earlier in 1915, the KKK, or Ku Klux Klan, experienced a rebirth coinciding with the release of a movie called The Birth of a Nation.
The Ku Klux Klan actually started in 1865 after the U.S. Civil War as an organization that was dedicated to terrorizing Black people and using violence as a means to maintain white supremacy. It is entirely a hate group. It's not a brotherhood or a heritage thing or anything else. Literally, its entire purpose is to scare and lynch Black people, Jewish people, immigrants, anyone they don't like, really.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And as you said, it started at the end of the Civil War, and it died down a bit, but this sort of, The Birth of a Nation, the movie, sort of caused it to be reborn as a second wave, if you will. And by 1921, estimates show that around 3,000 Klansmen were residing in Tulsa alone. By this time, race riots have been frequently occurring across the country due to this labor competition between returning white vets and Black labor force. And the lack of jobs really caused racial tensions to escalate. And I don't like the term race riots, as I explained earlier, specifically because it implies a sort of balance, a sort of evenness to it. when in reality, it often comprised of white mobs attacking black neighborhoods with either the tacit approval or open collaboration of legal authorities like cops and so on.
Right. Yeah. And also, I feel like the term riot now is so racialized. And when you hear riot, you're meant to think mostly Black people and mostly poor people are basically throwing a tantrum. And it's just so dismissive of real problems. It's not a good term.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting because I remember when Toronto won the Toronto Raptors won the cup, the chip as they call it. All the fans, of course, streamed into the streets in a pre-COVID time, and there was cars being flipped over, that kind of thing. Every news coverage of that called it a celebration or whatever. No, the word riot was not applied for this sort of sporting occasion. It's solely reserved for, as you said, poor people, racialized people, and has carried a sort of political weight about it. In Tulsa specifically, there was a district known as Greenwood, and it's a very prosperous district that was commonly referred to as the Black Wall Street. It distributed two newspapers, black owned, two nightclubs, numerous stores, grocery stores, shops, and so on. And all of those were owned by black people, as well as many residents being of a professional class of lawyers, doctors, dentists, accountants, all basically black professionals working for black people in a self-reliant community.
So, what's so fucking enraging about this, as we'll go on to see, is that white people at this time were like, you're not allowed to be part of our community. They enforced segregation. They had these Jim Crow laws. So the black people in Tulsa, Oklahoma said, fine, we'll make our own community. And then when that community thrived, the white people lost their fucking minds.
Yeah, because they don't just want segregation, they want an unequal segregation. So whenever black communities thrive on their own, that's a threat to white people and their communities being prosperous and rich. And so not a threat in the material sense, but a threat in the sort of self-reflecting sense, in that if we're racially better than them, how come they're rich? You know what I mean?
Right. And this still goes on today, too. I've definitely seen it as a woman who's involved in women's groups where people who are historically excluded from something go on to make our own groups so that we can have opportunities within them. And the oppressive class who originally wouldn't let us into their group gets mad and wants in.
Yeah. So our story begins on May 30th of 1921, which was a Memorial Day Monday in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A black 19-year-old by the name of Dick Rowland enters an elevator operated by a white 17-year-old, Sarah Page. Now, Rowland is a black shoe shiner working in a parlor on Main Street, and Sarah Page was an elevator operator in the Drexel building. And the Drexel building had the only washroom that the black Rowland could use because of Jim Crow laws at the time. Washrooms were racially segregated. The Drexel building contained the only washroom that quote unquote colored people can use. And it was at the top of the building. So it was very likely that Rowland and Page were familiar with each other, given the location of the building relative to Rowland's workplace, and Page being the only elevator operator in that building. On that day, Rowland had entered the elevator, and a few moments later, the clerk at Renberg's, which is a clothing store on the first floor of the Drexel building, hears a woman scream and sees a black man running out of the building. He approaches the elevator and encounters Page in what was reported as a distraught state. The common explanation often offered is that Dick Rowland tripped as he got onto the elevator, and as he tried to catch his fall, he grabbed onto the arm of Sarah Page, who then screamed. Now, I can't comment on the truth or falseness of these allegations, the depth of the story, the background. There's no confirmation of what happened, so everything really is hearsay. But the clerk ends up calling the police to report an assault. The police investigate and conclude that what happened was, quote, less than assault, end quote. And Sarah Page herself declines to press charges. Regardless, Rowland, being a black teenager in Tulsa, Oklahoma, had fled to his mother's house in Greenwood because this is a time in U.S. society where even the mere rumor of an assault by a black person on a white woman especially will get you lynched. The mobs are easily formed and incited based on rumors alone.
They're just waiting for an excuse.
It's almost like it's like a tourist attraction for them.
Oh, yeah, it's sick. People used to go watch hangings, too. It was like a community event.
Yeah, I've also seen like postcards made of like various lynchings where like you have like a white mob surrounding like a corpse or something, and it's like a friendly family postcard of some sort.
I think human beings do have a fascination with the macabre. We literally run a true crime podcast, so I definitely don't want to sit here and say it's disgusting that people would have an interest in death. But that's not what this is. This is violence, and this is racialized violence.
Yeah, it's specifically targeting black people. It's not a sort of like, oh yeah, I'm binge watching serial killer TV shows or whatever.
Yeah.
So the next day, May 31st, 1921, a white detective by the name of Henry Carmichael and a black patrolman, Henry Pack. By the way, Henry Pack was one of 2 of 45 police officers that was black in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So I don't know if they sent him specifically for the optics and for the appearances, but he goes along with Henry Carmichael to locate Rowland, and they figured that he was in his mom's house, and they detain him. And Rowland was taken first to the Tulsa City Jail before Police Commissioner J.M. Atkinson had him moved to the Tulsa courthouse because at this point, there were rumors and messages flooding into the police station by anonymous white people threatening Rowland's life, basically, saying, we're going to kill this guy. The Tulsa Tribune, which is a white-owned newspaper in Tulsa, reports in a headline in the afternoon, and I'm quoting here, so excuse the language, quote, "Nab Negro for attacking girl in elevator," end quote. This is the headline they ran with.
Yeah, that sounds like a command to me, an imperative. Like, you should nab Dick Rowland.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. They phrase it in such a way that they can hide behind semantics if they were like sued or whatever, but it is a very, very inciting headline.
Yeah.
Allegedly, they called for a lynching, though no records of that particular copy of the newspaper, like that issue, remains, so there's no proof. But a lot of witnesses say they read accounts where they were calling for a lynching.
Yeah, I read in my research for this case, too, that after the massacre, the newspaper went through its own archives and tried to eliminate evidence that it had called for racial violence.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all.
But it also alludes to the fact that when they printed that, they knew exactly what they were doing. And then when it happened, they were like, oh, what?
Yeah, it's like how it's pretty much the early 20th century version of how like Ben Shapiro will tweet all these things, and then some psychotic incel will like shoot up a mosque or like kill a bunch of girls or whatever. And then he's like, what? My tweets? No, I'm supporting peace. I support peace, whatever, thing like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So by 4 p.m. of May 31st, rumors of a lynching begin spreading like wildfire.
Yeah, we did just discuss this, but what's really disturbing here is that white people got really hyped for lynchings, and violence against Black people was entertainment to them, and they got excited when an opportunity arose to possibly murder someone. So these rumors were going around Tulsa that there was going to be a lynching, and people got excited and decided there was definitely going to be a lynching because they were already hyped for it. Like, it's just so sick.
Yeah, it's kind of like a weird mindset, which is like, well, I got dressed and I'm out of the house, so there better be a lynching because I didn't get dressed for nothing.
Yeah. And the people, like, if there wasn't a lynching, then the people would incite violence anyway because they were angry that there wasn't a lynching.
Yeah, it's really fucking sick. Well, by 7 p.m., the white mob of, by this time, several hundreds congregates around the courthouse. And Tulsa Sheriff Willard McClough organizes his deputies to guard Rowland. At this point, 3 white men enter the courthouse and demand McClough to hand over Rowland. And McClough refuses, despite being outnumbered. He tells the white men that if anyone enters the courthouse again, they will be shot on sight. Which, I mean, again, I'm not a big fan of the police, but kudos to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now at this point in Greenwood, they hear what's going on and there's the division over how to react. The older, wealthier black men were wary of confrontation because they didn't want to risk an open riot and lose property, their houses, all that kind of thing, because they know that if a riot starts, it will be very hard to stop. Meanwhile, you have World War I veterans, black veterans, were busy already arming themselves and preparing ammunition. They thought that the confrontation was going to be inevitable. 9:30 p.m. is when 50 to 60 black men arrive at the courthouse armed with rifles and shotguns. And white attorney James Luther later testified during the investigation of the massacre, quote, "I saw a car full of Negroes driving through the streets with guns. I saw Bill McClough and told them those Negroes would cause trouble. McClough tried to talk to them, and they got out and stood in single file. W.G. Daggs was killed near Boulder and 6th Street. I was under the impression that a man with authority could have stopped and disarmed them. I saw Chief of Police on south side of courthouse on top step talking. I did not see any officer except the chief. I walked in the courthouse and met McClough in about 15 feet of his door. I told him these Negroes were going to make trouble, and he said he had told them to go home. He went out and told the whites to go home, and one said, they said you told them to come up here, referring to the black people. McClough said, quote, I did not, and a Negro said, you did, tell us to come, end quote. So there's a lot of he said, she said in the post-massacre investigation. A lot of people are claiming that the white sheriff McClough had invited these black men to come as reinforcements. He denies it. This attorney apparently overheard this conversation and testified, so I'm not really sure. So, hearing reports of these armed black men, about 1,000 or so white men begin arming themselves. Some try to storm the National Guard armory in Tulsa, but Major James Bell, who was in charge of that armory, warned them that any trespassers would be shot on sight, so they left. There were also multiple shots fired in the air across the city as warnings. And then at this point, 75 more black men show up as reinforcements to protect Rowland, in addition to the 50 and 60 that showed up earlier. It's a fuse waiting to explode, basically. Just one spark is all it's going to take. And that spark happened when, at night, a tussle between a black man and a white man, where the latter, the white man, was demanding the pistol of the former, the black man, led to a shot being fired. And no one knows what the reason for the shot being fired, whether it was a warning or an accident or was deliberate, but that just caused everything to explode. The white mob begins firing on the group of black men who fire back, but within seconds, 10 whites and 2 black men lay dead or dying on the street. And being outnumbered, the black group begins retreating towards Greenwood while being pursued by this white mob, causing a rolling gunfight to occur that included casualties that were bystanders or moviegoers that were coming out of theaters. It just exploded. And by 11 p.m. Of that night, the National Guard were deployed to quell unrest, and many black folks were detained at a convention hall because they were armed.
Yeah, the National Guard basically responded by turning a blind eye to white violence and instead rounded up and detained black people in some circumstances, citing their own safety as a reason, but they didn't use their power to impose consequences on the white people who were actually enacting the violence.
Exactly. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about how I don't like the term race riot because it equivocates when in reality it's often white mobs attacking black communities with the express collaboration of sort of the white law enforcement apparatus. And I mean, if you go to like Weber and define a state as the sole monopoly on legitimate violence, it does seem to me that these sort of white mobs exist with direct approval of the state. So their violence is an extension of the state.
Right. And also, the riot term equates defending yourself and defending your loved ones and your community with the people who are actually inflicting that violence.
Yeah, exactly. So this was all happening of the night of May 31st going into the dawn of June 1st of 1921. There were gunfights throughout the night. small white groups began launching forays into Greenwood, where they sort of like 3 or 4 of them in a car would drive by and try to shoot black people. Meanwhile, you have white rioters in similar forays would drive in with oil rags and light them on fire and throw them onto buildings to try and get a fire going. By 1 a.m., a white mob begins setting fire to black businesses. Like at this point, the drive-by stop and a white mob begins approaching. And they start to the southern part of Greenwood, moving up the street, where there were also claims, and again, these are all witnesses, but I'm not surprised. There were claims of a white mob preventing firemen from putting out the fires with the end of a gun. Like they were pointing guns at firemen, being like, if you go in there, we're going to shoot you. And this is the diary of a fireman, of the fire chief, who was reporting what he was seeing. Quote, "It would mean a fireman's life to turn a stream of water on one of those Negro buildings. They shot at us all morning when we were trying to do something, but none of my men were hit. There is not a chance in the world to get through that mob into the Negro district." End quote.
Yeah, that's absolutely chilling. And also, I can't put myself into someone's shoes who would see these white people, like a white person who saw these other white people terrorizing this neighborhood and thought, I'm going to join them. I'm going to be part of that. Like what the fuck is going on in your mind other than pure unadulterated hatred and racism that you would be like, I'm going to light this rag on fire and throw it?
Yeah, and it's fascinating because not only is the racial animus directed towards black people, I mean, of course it is, but you have these white firemen coming in to do their job, and you're so full of hatred that you're like, I'm going to shoot you if you help these people.
Yeah, I can even understand in the case where someone wins a sporting match and you get really excited and like run around the city. Like, I don't endorse lighting things on fire in that circumstance either, but I can understand the excitement. But this is not delightfully exciting in any fucking way. It is horrifying. It is a massacre, a genocide.
What train of thought goes through your head if you're sitting at home and like say your window overlooks a street and you're just like, I don't know what they do in this time, like listen to the radio or read a book or whatever, and you see this white mob coming down the street and you're like a white person and you see this white mob coming down the street chasing black people and shooting them, and you're like, hang on, where are my boots, where's my shirt, I need to go and join this mob.
Yeah, and maybe it's part of my personality that I hate coming out of my house to do anything. But honestly, if anything is going on outside my house ever, I literally just like close my windows and like go into, like, if someone knocks on the door and I'm not expecting someone, I don't answer.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, same, yeah. I prefer being texted before someone visits me, first of all. Second of all, when the Raptors won in Toronto, everyone was out in the street and I was looking at all the Instagram videos, but I didn't go out because I was like, why? Like, I'll just watch the videos and pretend I was part of it.
Yeah. When our university basketball team used to do well, and I knew that everyone would be outside drinking and celebrating, I was like, oh, thank God the library will be empty.
That is the nerdiest thing I've ever heard. It's the most adorable, nerdiest thing ever.
It's an extremely Aaron thing to do.
Massive respect for that. But I mean, lighthearted tangents aside, I think we're going to go back to this sort of a grim affair, this rather depressing story.
Fucking horrible.
Yeah, I mean, by 4 a.m. of June 1st, 24 businesses in Greenwood were set on fire. Black residents began arming themselves for self-defense. But then you had a mass exodus of many fleeing black families who just wanted to get away from the chaos.
I am against using the term fleeing here as I am against it in the Nakba, because fleeing, I mean, yes, they are fleeing, but they're being forced out.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a choice. It wasn't consensual in any way. It wasn't like they were either going to die or be pushed out.
They're being expelled. They're being systematically expelled.
Yeah, they were being systematically expelled from this district.
Because later, when anything like this happens, the oppressing power will always turn around and say like, oh, well, they just left. Like the black people just left Greenwood, so that's why we decided to gentrify it.
Fuck me. Yeah, they were expelled. They were absolutely expelled. Thanks for pointing that out. So by 5 a.m., sunrise, and with sunrise, a train whistle is heard across the city. But the white mob believed this whistle was actually a signal to attack the district. So the first white man pops his head around the corner and gets shot by a sniper in Greenwood, which, oh, sucks to be you. Fuck off.
Also, how stupid do you have to be to hear a train whistle that probably goes off every day and think it's a signal to attack? Like, oh, the rooster crowed, therefore I'm going to commit some racial violence. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, and if indeed there was some sort of organization where it was like, all right, we're going to attack at the sound of a whistle, at least make it a different kind of whistle, not a fucking train whistle, not to confuse your inbred dipshit KKK people.
I don't actually believe they're this stupid. I think they're saying that to get away with it, but still.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first guy gets shot by a sniper, but at this point, the mob is like thousands strong. So a massive attack is launched, led by 5 white men in a car who ended up getting shot and killed by a volley of gunfire from the black defenders. But the overwhelming numbers really show, and black residents begin falling back north as a white mob begins looting, smashing, breaking into houses, ordering residents of said houses out to be detained, even though they had no authority to detain anyone. They were just random white mob people, not like any authority figure.
They also stole like all of their things, anything of
Oh
value.
yeah, absolutely. Like this was a case in point of looting, like looting happening on a systematic scale. And then you also had eyewitness reports of airplanes carrying white assailants who were indiscriminately shooting at black people and dropping firebombs on homes, buildings, and families. And the reports say that those planes were, quote, privately owned, but I'm not quite sure.
So, in my research, I read that some of them were owned by the black residents of Greenwood and that the white people stole them and used them to drop these firebombs. So, I'm just guessing here that they were probably smaller planes for stuff like crop dusting, especially at that time. They weren't like private jets, they were little tiny engine planes.
Yeah, but I mean, you could do a lot of damage even with those small planes if you had someone who either knew how to shoot or just dropping firebombs, basically.
Oh, completely. Yeah, it's a complete tactical nightmare if you're on the ground and someone is shooting at you from an airplane.
Yeah, there's nothing you could do, really, especially at this time where there was no really anti-air weaponry at all. And it's interesting that law enforcement later claims that the planes were sent for reconnaissance to, quote, prevent a Negro uprising, end quote, and also mention that there were law enforcement officers on those planes. So they're basically incriminating themselves here.
Yeah, I would assume too that the National Guard had planes, and instead of using them to stop violence by the white people, they either did nothing or they helped, which are basically the same because doing nothing is still
Is helping, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like over a dozen planes were spotted circling Greenwood. So it wasn't like one or two. It was pretty much an air force at this point.
That's so fucking scary.
Yeah, and then the riots begin spreading outwards, and the mob begins targeting not just black families, but any white families who've hired sort of like black servants in their households. And they demand the white families to either turn their servants over or face the wrath of the mob. And the white families that didn't turn their black servants over, which was like a rare few, but not a non-zero number, ended up having their houses burnt as well. 9:15 a.m. By this time, the damage is done, really. But Adjutant General Charles Barrett arrives with 109 Oklahoma National Guardsmen. They pause to eat breakfast, perfect time for, breakfast, because, there's legal work to be done, and to deploy requires paperwork, and for the general to contact every local authority, including the mayor, the sheriff, the chief of police, before they're allowed to deploy. By 11:41 a.m., Barrett, having gotten all the appropriate paperwork, declares martial law and suppresses the remnants of the riots. Black men and women were detained at 3 separate locations, thousands of them, while others were expelled from the city, forcibly expelled from the city. And on Friday, June 3rd, 1921, 2 days after the massacre, martial law was finally lifted. The aftermath of this massacre is appalling. The official death count, and I'm quoting here the air quotes, is that there were 36 deaths, 26 black people and 10 white people. But estimates by the Red Cross, among other organizations at the time, range as high as 300 deaths. There were also several miscarriages of pregnancies where hospitals in the area reported black women coming in with miscarriages because of the violence. And over 10,000 black residents of Greenwood were made homeless by this massacre. Greenwood itself was destroyed. The public school there and the hospital were both burnt. Over 191 shops and businesses, as well as several churches, were burnt and sacked to the ground. The damages at the time amounted to $1.5 million in real estate and $750,000 in personal property, which today is equivalent to around $32 million.
I read too that they just burnt 35 blocks to the ground. That is a huge area. Just absolutely destroyed it.
You could see the fires from like miles out of Tulsa, like just miles out. You could see smoke rising. It's just depressing because at the end, nobody was charged for this. Like there was no criminal. The only criminal conviction was for the chief of police, whose name escapes me here. But they ended up convicting him on a bunch of other charges, like racketeering and things that like everyone at that time knew that the Tulsa Police Department was corrupt and they were doing their own like racketeering or things where like they'll get people to steal your car and then you'll go to the cops and pay them some amount of money for them to return your car to you.
Yeah, the cops where I live had this big racketeering scheme where they would force bars and nightclubs to hire off-duty cops as bouncers, which is illegal, by the way. Like, cops are not supposed to work as private security in their off time. That's a conflict of interest. Yeah, it's in their contracts or whatever. But if the bar said, no, I don't want to hire these bouncers, I have my own, or we don't have those kinds of issues or whatever, then the police would station someone outside this bar and arrest people for like public intox and stuff like that.
Very normal, very healthy, very... See, this is what I don't understand, okay? Police are getting mad, like, now in the year of our Lord 2020 because, like, I don't know, their Egg McMuffin came out late or came out wrong or whatever, and they suddenly feel the sort of hostility that the public holds for them, this sort of contempt the majority of people look at them with. They don't get it. They don't understand where the contempt comes from, where the animosity comes from. You guys are fucking assholes. Fuck off.
You're a gang. They're a giant gang.
Yeah.
And they have power given to them by the state, whereas at least other gangs have to like work their way up, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I respect other gangs more because they have more obstacles to like, navigate. These thugs get like guns and whatever, and they're like, do whatever you want, and there's no obstacles to what they can do. And this guy, this chief of police who got convicted on racketeering in Tulsa, he was the only one, and he was basically like, okay, yeah, you have to go to jail for this, but whatever. Like, no one else was charged for any of this.
Also, relating to the death count, I absolutely 100% believe that they lowballed the death count of Black people in regard to how many people were straight up murdered, as in like shot by this white mob. But you have to add on to that as well. Like you said, the miscarriages, Amr, the pregnancy miscarriages, and also being forced out of your home like that. People will die from quote unquote natural causes that they otherwise would not have died.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, there's nothing to show how they measured this official death count because, like, they say these are the people who were shot. And I'm with you on the fact that I think they completely underballed. There were a lot more people shot. But even things like, okay, if you're burning a building and the people in that building die of fire or smoke inhalation, then that doesn't count because it's considered, it's just a fire, right? They don't count that, for example. Right. Or even people who are not dead, getting shot sounds like a fucking nightmare. If you're shot and you're crippled for life or like completely like paralyzed, that is a casualty. That's not death, but like your life is more or less completely changed for the worse because of it.
Yeah, and the 10,000 people that were made homeless, a lot of them ran into the woods, were expelled and ran for their lives, and any number of things could happen to you. Not to mention, just the unsafety of being in that situation where you don't know if you see someone else, are they a Black person who is also run, or are they a white person who's going to kill you?
Exactly. To your point about the 10,000 people who were expelled into the woods, one of the podcasts I listened to, Radio Warner, one of the hosts, John Dolan, makes a really good point about genocide and how genocides have historically worked. So the word genocide, a lot of people tend to associate it with like the Holocaust and like Nazi Germany. But it's actually very historically rare to see a genocide so industrialized. Like, we're going to send these people to camps and kill them in those camps. Usually what happens with genocide historically is that the genociding power will enter a territory and commit such violence on this particular village or town or whatever, that word spreads immediately that these people are coming and they're doing so and so to this town, that all the people in the surrounding towns will flee into the woods, into the marshes, into the wild, where disease, dysentery, famine will take care of them, especially if they have like young children and the water is dirty, which means very easily diarrhea will kill you, dysentery will kill you, malaria if you're in places with mosquitoes. That's how genocide has historically worked. So it is very appropriate to call this a genocide if you're pushing 10,000 Black people because of their race into the wild, where they have to suffer the casualties of being in the wild.
Right, exactly. And they knew what they were doing when they did that.
Exactly, yeah.
Let's bring our attention back around to 2020. As we said at the beginning of this episode, Donald Trump decided to hold his first, Amr said post-COVID rally. I wouldn't say we're really post-COVID. We are now in a phase where we are prioritizing money over human lives, even more so than usual. But here we are. Here we go. Yeah. So Trump held his rally. It did not appear to go well for him. Wah, wah. So the TikTok teens and the K-pop kids have done it again. And what they did is reserve tons of seats online, because to go to a Trump rally, I think it's free to get a ticket, or it might have a small fee, but you reserve your seat, reserve your ticket, and then show up. But what these people did is reserve all the tickets and then didn't show up. So the auditorium had lots and lots of empty seats. Haha.
The Venn diagram of TikTok teens and future Red Guard cadres of Maoist troops is a circle.
Amr, I feel like you and I are right on the edge of millennial and Gen Z. I think we're technically millennials, but can I switch my allegiance?
Yeah, I really hope Gen Z accept me as one of their own, because they're a lot more good to belong to than millennials.
Yeah, I'll learn your stuff, Gen Z. I'll watch your TV shows. I'll listen to your music. Just let me in so that we
Twitch
can
streams and fucking pay you for Twitch streams or whatever.
Yeah, I want to join you in trolling the fascists. It's my favorite thing, and you're really good at it.
Also, massive respect to K-pop fans, because if there's one group of people that are so dedicated that if you inculcate them with enough political consciousness, they're more than happy to do guerrilla warfare for 10 years, do a long march, basically. That's K-pop fans.
Yeah, they also, if there are hashtags online and stuff that are racist, K-pop fans will just bombard them with images of K-pop idols and stuff like that. They will just overwhelm the hashtag with their own content so that racists can't find what they're looking for. It's so funny.
They're tactical geniuses. They're strategic geniuses.
I'm also grateful to the K-pop people, because they have brought Korean beauty and skincare into the United States where I live. And now Korean skincare is all I use. It's so good.
Yeah, massive respect.
I want to talk about an incident too. This woman named Sheila Buck was arrested by Tulsa police for sitting outside the rally wearing a shirt that said "I can't breathe" on it. And she did have a ticket for the rally, which she reserved. I'm not sure if she was going to go inside and maybe planned on protesting from within, or if she just wanted to be there. But they basically arrested her because they believed she might cause a disturbance. I don't even know, but it's fucking The Tulsa police were serving the interests of Donald Trump and his racist fans.
What causes do they have to arrest her? There's like she has a ticket. She's not trespassing. There's nothing to. There's no legal reason. I mean, she has every reason to sue the department.
I hope she does, but that's what is so scary. And when we say that the police are a gang, they are. And at this point, they were utilizing their gang power to get this woman out of the way who they believed might pose a threat to their rally. And when I say threat, it's like the smallest thing, because this is, from my understanding, like an older white woman who cares about racial justice and maybe might have gone in and said, like, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows how open cops have become with regards to how much of a gang they are. I also want to mention, I mean, not related to Tulsa, but I was listening to another podcast and I mentioned that in Seattle, the cops have announced that journalists are no longer accepted from any sort of declaration that a gathering is illegal. So if cops were to say that this protest is like illegal, you have to disperse, journalists have to disperse too, or they can face arrest. It's under the discretion of the cops to determine when, how, and if a protest is illegal and how much territory that covers, like how many city blocks or whatever. So it's just, they're outright like black shirts at this point.
Yeah, and also if people are gathered for a protest and then suddenly it becomes illegal and the cops kettle those people in and start arresting them, like, what the fuck? You're never safe. Even if your protest is legal and it becomes illegal at some arbitrary point, and there you are just like standing in the street holding your little sign and the cops come and arrest you. Like, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to defend yourself from that?
Yeah, this is what gets me about like the liberal sorts of like, well, there are good cops. And it's like, okay, sure, there are cops who like walk their dog or like play with their child or whatever. But if you're working for this institution and you're made to follow these orders, the responsibility is on your shoulders at the end of the day. Like you're with your fellow cops applying these unjust and barbaric laws on people.
It's also just a really weak argument overall, because you could pick any terrible group of people and find some that might have a couple nice qualities about them. Like, what the fuck does that mean?
Fuck it now. Yeah, so yeah, there's just a lot to unpack there. And I think there's a lot of political analysis for this, the massacre, the history, and the current situation in the US. And that's, I think, it's very timely to discuss this massacre and the various veins of analysis that it protrudes, including, for example, reparations. Are reparations useful? How do you apply reparations? Who do you give reparations to? Who do you take them from? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I do just want to comment on what you just said about this massacre finally coming to light. Some of the reasons for that are thanks to Black journalists and writers and researchers who tirelessly worked on this, writing articles about it, gathering materials about it. And that work is so important. And of course, as we will discuss, this massacre is at the beginning of the Watchmen series on HBO. But as a non-Black person, I am so privileged to sit here and say, like, oh, I didn't know about this until recently. It's so sick that I am able to sit in this place and not feel that, like, just not even know about it. And I know when people say, wow, I had never heard about that, that's so horrible, like, they're being genuine and they're not trying to be assholes or something like that. But how privileged are we that I lived 24 years of my life without even knowing that?
It's really interesting because Tulsa State City basically organized a commission to investigate this in the 70s and the report, or the 80s, I think. And the reports came out in 2001. And part of the recommendation was instituting a sort of part of the curriculum with all Tulsa schools is to extensively cover the massacre. So that's good. But at the same time, it's only localized to Tulsa because, you know, education in the US is very sporadic and very detached. So it's very difficult to get these things into the mainstream narrative, so to speak.
Yeah, and I just know that if you are Black, these stories and the whole collection of them weigh on you every single day. Because, like we said, the police are still there acting like a gang. And this is something that absolutely destroyed a community. And that's a trauma that goes on for generations. So I just feel like when these stories come to light, more for the quote unquote mainstream, and especially the white people in this country, and we're like, wow, I never knew about that. Of course, it's so important to learn about these things. We should never stop learning or just turn away. But like, I think we really should reflect on how if you are not Black, you can go on living your life with no empathy for this and no knowledge of this trauma. And that's just so disturbing.
Oh yeah, and I think part of what's disturbing to me at least is how you have disingenuous, like, racist right wingers, and they're not arguing in good faith themselves, but they'll say things like, "Well, why can't Black communities just like work as hard as white communities to achieve the same level of economic prosperity?"
Oh my God, they work 5 times as hard.
Yeah, and I mean, they're not saying it in good faith, but if you have some like person who's like completely historically unaware of these events, it's just very difficult because like even when Black people end up forming a community that's prosperous and has professionals and everyone's sort of like working with each other, you still end up losing everything because, the cops and the white mob decided today is your unlucky day.
Yeah, Black communities are not allowed to thrive. White people and the systemic racism do not allow them to just live in peace.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the HBO series Watchmen,
Which
which,
portrayed the massacre, by the way, very, very well, I think.
yes, I think probably one of the best things about the show is that it caused people to learn about the Tulsa Massacre, learn about Tulsa in general. And when a piece of popular media causes people to learn about racism, I generally think that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to preface this, Watchmen is based on a comic book graphic novel, like a limited series. And the show itself is not an adaptation of the comic so much as part of the canon, like an extension, if you will. And it's set in Tulsa. And the massacre plays a very, very important role in some of the characters' backstories.
If you have followed our podcast for a while, and especially if you subscribe to our Patreon, you know that Amr references the graphic novels Watchmen quite often.
It's one of my favorites.
I did
pieces of
skim the
literature.
graphic novel in preparation for this podcast, and I watched Watchmen, and I have mixed feel. I liked the graphic novel a lot more, and I think the graphic novel does a better job of getting the politics across. But of course, we're talking about two different forms of media here, so I don't want to be too
Yeah, with two different
judgy.
creators too. Like the people who wrote the novel aren't the people who created the show.
I also really don't like when someone shows up to be like, the book was so much better than the movie. Like, they're two different things. Yes, sometimes movie adaptations can really suck, or TV adaptations, not saying otherwise, but like, it's kind of a snobbish thing. We all know that snob.
Oh yeah,
The
it's
book
very
snob.
elitist and very annoying. It's very insufferable. The converse of that is there's a lot of movies and shows that transcended their books, like Fight Club, for example.
Right. And also, if I wanted to sit down and read the book, I would read the book, but I didn't. I wanted to have my snack and watch a movie. Leave me alone.
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't see why people think that liking books over movies is a substitute for a personality.
Watchmen, though, it's very HBO, and it forces you to use a lot of brain power.
Yes. Okay, first of all, I want to say the cinematics are incredible. The cinematic, like, from a sort of purely production point of view, one of the
Yes.
best TV shows I've seen.
Great aesthetics.
Yes.
And we are very shallow on Das Criminal, and we really praise aesthetics.
Well, I mean, we're shallow, but we're also sort of snobs of our own in the sense, or I mean, at least I am in the sense that, like, I like it when a show uses aesthetics to convey a theme or reinforce its point, and I think Watchmen does a great job of that. And I do like they continue the use of clocks and watches from the graphic novel as a recurring motif for a lot of important things that I'm not going to spoil.
Yeah, we're not going to give spoilers. I will say this is a big brain TV show.
Yes, it's not something to watch in the background. I watched it while it was being aired live. So every week I'd on Sunday evenings, I'll sit in front of my computer and watch it. And I have to say, I really loved it. I know Aaron has some very valid critiques of it, but for me, it's up there as one of the better shows. And from the news I've heard, it's only a one season thing. Like they're not planning to do another season.
Yeah, it's quite sci-fi. I like sci-fi dystopia as a genre. I will say about Watchmen, it spends a lot of time world building, and a lot of the mysteries in the show are based around that world building. And if that's not the kind of content that you like, you will not like the show.
Yeah, there's a lot of flashbacks as well.
Yeah, and a lot of who is this person? What is this setting? Is this at the same time? What is going on? And if you are a person like my parents, for instance, who they will hear this and they will know it's true, even if they're mad, talk through a television show and say, like, who's that? Is that the bad guy? Is that guy trying to kill that guy? What's happening? Then Watchmen is not for you.
Did they try watching Watchmen?
No, but
Okay.
definitely they will say, like, is that guy good or bad? I don't know, Mom. That's the mystery that we're supposed to figure out.
It's interesting because they don't feed you the information directly. There's a lot of connections to be made by focusing, which is why Aaron said it's a big brain show. It's not something that you can't focus on. You can easily lose a thread.
I kind of think perhaps the politics of the show get lost in that. That's kind of my issue with it.
I agree. I think for me, I think it's very obvious that places like HBO, for example, they're willing to toe the line. They have some subversive sort of content, but not go over that line, if that makes sense. Like they'll package their shows in a sort of facade of rebelliousness or revolutionary content, but at the end of the day, they're a capitalist corporation that wants to make money. So for me, Watchmen, what I noticed in Watchmen, and you can, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it caters to a very particular audience, the quote unquote woke crowd, by really, really touching on some social issues without really interrogating those social issues in a way that makes people uncomfortable, which I think great art should and must.
No, I completely agree with you. I will say too about HBO in general, I'll use Last Week Tonight with John Oliver as an example. We cited a segment from it last week on our Fred Zane episode. Some parts of that show are so good, and John Oliver comes out in support of Medicare for all and stuff like that. And I'm like, wow, this is good. But then other episodes, like his one on Iran, is so, so bad. And I feel like if you watch the show uncritically and like most of it and don't know anything about Iran, you would just believe it,
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's very insidious because you have this person who's saying good things, like the Medicare for all example. But if you're someone who is not politically conscious, for example, and this person earns your trust by saying things that you think sound good initially, and then starts speaking about subjects that you have no clue about and you're aware that you have no clue about, like Iran, you trust them to be right. You trust them to be honest, and they're clearly not.
Right. So that's kind of my problem with HBO shows, where they paint themselves to be progressive and they get all the people who want to see themselves as progressive on board. And then when it comes to something like Iran or Palestine, for instance, they completely shit the bed, but nobody else knows that.
Yeah, you'd have to be very politically aware originally to notice that discrepancy. Otherwise, you take them at face value and it's very dangerous.
Also, this is Showtime and not HBO, but same type of thing where they employed Arab graffiti artists to do some graffiti for Homeland, a show incidentally about terrorism. And the graffiti artists wrote in Arabic things like Homeland is racist, and they got into the final cut of the show.
Hell yes.
It's amazing. It's an amazing form of meta protest. But it also shows you that Homeland, a show ostensibly about terrorism, which frames Arabs as terrorists, clearly doesn't employ any Arabs or Arabic speakers.
Funny. One of the sort of posters, the advertising posters, had the main character, the blonde woman, in a sea of women wearing like black hijabs and niqabs, and she's the only one turning towards the camera. And like you could see her like, blonde hair and blue eyes while everyone else is facing away from the camera. So all you could see the back of their heads and they're all just wearing hijabs. And it's like one of the worst sort of pictures I've ever seen in my life. Just genuinely like Edward Said would have had a stroke watching that.
It's straight up Orientalism in a single image. Deepa Kumar actually does a lot of research and has written a lot of content about Homeland and about those specific sexualized politics of Islamophobia. It's really interesting.
But yeah, like HBO at least is more conscious of trying to appear progressive, but at the end of the day, they really drop the ball when it comes to a lot of political issues that would otherwise contravene American empire's political objectives.
Right. I feel like HBO, it earns my respect and then it stabs me in the back. And it's kind of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, still shame on you, but I'm not going to let you fool me twice.
You know what they say, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice. Well, you can't fool me again.
But I feel like Watchmen overall does have a message of, if you do not dismantle oppressive systems like the police, they will continue to oppress people regardless of their identity makeups. But I had to do a lot of thinking to decide that that's what the show was about. And that's kind of my problem.
Yeah, they were very obtuse about it. And yeah, I do think that one of the great things about the show is how they portray police violence on a variety of sort of identity groups. It's very class-based. They definitely show the discrepancies in class, as well as how cops can become gangs very quickly. There's also a character on the show that I really sympathize with called Red Scare. And it's like this thick Russian guy with a Russian accent whose line that I'm going to get tattooed on my collarbone is, "I'm a communist, you dumb fuck." In response to the guy calling him a fascist. It's a very complicated show. I really like they bring back characters from the comic books. So like a lot of the characters from the comic book make a comeback, and I really like how it's intertwined with the current story. And there's themes of like corruption, cop brutality, class warfare, things of that nature. But also, you're right in the sense that they don't make it easy to swallow. It's very convoluted, and they're very afraid of pissing off the wrong people.
Yeah, maybe our listeners will just think I am very slow, and I admit that it takes a lot of energy for me to watch big brain films in television. I cannot sit down to watch a film I know is going to be heavy unless I have mustered up the time and brain power, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I feel like you spend so much time and energy trying to figure out the world building and the plot and these scenes jumping back and forth that it obscures the message. That's just how I felt watching it. I also think they were quite obviously trying to subvert impressions of the identities of people in power. So they had lots of Black police officers. So if that's what they're going to do, and they want this to be based in part on the real world with the Tulsa Massacre and such, why not have Barack Obama or someone like Barack Obama in the show to demonstrate the point that even if we have, women landlords and a Black president and gay CEOs, that doesn't undo oppressive systems.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to spoil the plot too much, but I think it would have been interesting if they had, an Obama president or, a Black sheriff of some sort, or they dug in further. They didn't go far enough, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So with that, I guess we can wrap up.
Yeah, this will come out tomorrow morning. I'm going to edit it tonight. So keep an eye on Tulsa and what the Trump supporters are up to, singing their little songs and arresting people who get in their way.
Yeah, and if you're out there protesting, solidarity and stay safe, comrades.
Yep, we are about to record our mini episode as well, which will be out on Wednesday.
Yeah, so for everyone, really, see you on Wednesday. See you tomorrow, and then see you on Wednesday again.
Bye, guys.
Bye.